Hello and welcome to another online simple service here from St Denys. This is going out sometime in June, probably appearing Sunday the 12th. So good morning to you if you're watching at the live launch of that. And today we're going to be thinking about journeys of faith. We're going to hear from Sera later, and the musicians will have something for us here as well. But first, as we're thinking about journeys, join me in this gathering prayer. God calls us on a journey into the unknown, a journey into love and laughter, a journey into pain and despair, a journey where we walk together, a journey where we walk alone. So come, let's walk life's journey together, knowing it's God who invites us to journey, and it is God who will journey with us. So there's a line in today's reading where it says he obeyed and went even though he didn't know where he was going. And it's talking about Abraham, or Abraham I think as it was at the time. And Sarah's going to tap into ideas of calling and dislocation and faith. The strapline for the service today was journeys of faith. And I guess the days of having a roadmap, your AA roadmap in the back of the car, and has been kind of outmoded by the universal use of sat-nav. And I guess with the birth of sat-nav, nobody should ever get lost on any journey. But sat-navs do sometimes lead people to the wrong place. And I'm going to give you a quick example of this. So I was travelling to a cricket match. This is about 11 years ago now, and there'd been some quite heavy torrential rain. I was driving up with a colleague. He was in charge of directions, and somewhat ironically, as this turns out, he was a geography teacher, and we'd followed Google Maps, and it suggested we drove through a ford to get to where we were meant to be going, and we drove into it, but we did not drive out. We came to an abrupt stop. Steam poured from the bonnet where the engine had cut out. We had in fact driven into what had become, with this torrential rain, a river. The water started seeping in, it levelled out inside by around the top of the gear stick, and fortunately enough, as you can see in the picture, the electrics were still working, and we exited the car via the windows. We called the RAC, who turned up as you maybe see behind the other side of the car about an hour later, and they said, I don't know if this is how I remember it or what they actually said to us, they couldn't help us because only an idiot would drive into that. And fortunately enough, we were actually rescued by a passing cray fisherman who hauled us out with some ropes and his 4x4, and miraculously, somewhat, about an hour later, after the car had been kind of drying out, it chugged back into life and survived for another 3 years. But this photo has gone down as an iconic but somewhat foolish memory. But the conclusion, I guess, I take from that episode is that a driver does need to listen to the voice of sat-nav, but you've got to watch the landscape too. And it's no good following a voice or directions blindly on a journey. You need a bit of discernment about how to follow the voice's instructions. And when we follow and respond to God's call, what are the pointers and dangerous hazards that we might face on the way?
So for this reading, you're joining me live from the kids' playtent. Partly the reasoning being thinking about people on journeys, and particularly Abraham, or Abram, as this passage is about, would have been the journeying man in a tent. So two bits of Bible verses today. We've got Genesis 12 verses 1 to 7 and Hebrews 11 verses 8 to 10. The call of Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he sets out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they'd accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. Abram travelled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. And now Hebrews 11, 8-10. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God.
So they were the two parts of the reading there. I'm just going to take us through a confessional prayer. You've called us on a spiritual journey, Lord. Yet, too often, we see it as a sentimental journey. We found a comfortable place. We've settled. We like where we are. We like to think that we know where we're going. Forgive us our complacency. Call us from our comfort zones and lead us onwards as strangers on earth once more, so that we walk by faith and put our hope in you alone. Amen. So we're going to head over to Sarah now and also hear something from the musicians.
Hello there. I do love the fact that if I'd started this talk about 10 seconds earlier, we'd have begun with the deafening sound of an aeroplane flying over. Such is the life in the St Denis area. In fact, as we look at this theme of journeys, it strikes me that St Denis really is a good place for contemplating journeys. We've got those major route ways of the buses and the vans and the cars all going over the river east to west. We're part of a national bike network. We've got the boats that meander on the river that I can see from here, trains connecting us nationally. And then, as I heard a minute ago, we've got those planes taking off and landing. There's journeys going on everywhere. Never mind the day-to-day of just people walking places and running too. Now I wonder, if you were to think of life as a journey, your life, I wonder what analogy you would use for it. Maybe you'd use something about transport. Maybe you feel like you're on a bus journey where different people are coming and going at different times. Maybe you feel like a bit of a sailboat blown in the wind, trying to just harness its power but going where you're taken. Maybe you feel a bit like you're driving through the fog, or as Phil got us thinking about, you've just landed in a Ford and stuck. Maybe you feel actually, you've got the purpose and the direction of a plane that's just faced a detour. Or maybe in thinking of a journey, it's a different kind of analogy you would pick on. Journeys. It's a language that is taught a lot in books and novels and 21st century culture. A lot in life looks at life as a journey and talks often, I think these days particularly, about journeys being about self-improvement, about self-discovery. They're very self-orientated. And I wonder if that's healthy. I wonder if that gives the full picture of journeys. As Christians, we can have certain views of what the Christian journey is. I think sometimes we can be tempted to think there is one correct journey, one correct path. I've got to find it. God's got that one for me personally. I've got to get on it and go. A sense of finding the narrow one and it'll be clear and crisp. And I think there's a lot in there, again, that can be unhelpful and unhealthy. I'll unpackage that a bit as we look at Abraham in a minute. And then also within the Christian faith, there can be the idea that we have our faith journey, the part of life that's all about faith. And then there's the other journeys we're on, our work journey, our career path, our family journey, our physical journey moving from place to place. Never the twain will meet. Faith is separate from the rest. And I think my starting point today as we focus on faith journeys is to recognise that if you and I are friends and followers of Jesus, then faith saturates all of our journey. We're not to separate out and say that's bit about faith and that bit isn't. It saturates all of our life, our career, our jobs, our retirement, the time we spend with friends and families, the places we move to. All of it is saturated by faith. So I think my starting point, my first thing of today is to say, in looking at Abraham and looking at his faith journeys, we're not looking at it so that's only one part of our life it connects with. It actually connects with the whole of our life. Life as friends and followers of Jesus is a full-on faith journey. Just want to hold that with you as now we start unpackaging a bit more of Abraham's journey and maybe look at it in comparison with those two ideas of trying to get on the perfect narrow path and stay on it, and also that it's all about self-discovery and self-improvement. So we've had two readings today to help us think about Abraham's journey. We've got the start of his journey described in Genesis 12, which isn't just the start of Abraham's journey. Really, it's the start of a significant journey, well, for the people of God throughout. But also we then have the reading from Hebrews, looking back with hindsight on Abraham and other people's journey and making sense of it. And as we hold those two images and just look at them, those two readings, I just want to briefly draw out things about the starts of journey and the end of journeys, and then some features of actually doing the journey itself. So let's look at the beginning and the end first of Abraham's journey and look at it in terms of our own faith journey. Abraham's journey starts with a call and it starts with a promise. We have it there written in Genesis. Go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. That's the call. And the promise, I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make you a blessing and you will bless all nations of the world. There's a promise there. Just to mention something about calling, I think we can get tripped up on that by that word these days. I think we can have a sense of inadequacy, maybe going, I've never been called. What's my calling? I don't know my calling. I've got to find it. And also we can feel it's something that goes to everybody else. So either calling is for everyone else or calling is very narrow on a direct path. We could explore that hugely now, but I just want to offer you this idea that actually maybe if calling trips you up as a word, maybe something like God-influenced sense of purpose might help you all. Where is your sense of purpose? Is it God-shaped? Maybe that's something about what a calling can be. And as we look at Abraham, we're going to see it's not about a straight path. There's lots of meanderings. All friends and family and followers of God are called in a certain way to make disciples, to be his witness, to live in his image. There are some personal callings and some shapes in there, but maybe just to hold that as this idea of sense of purpose, godly sense of purpose, rather than calling might help you as we look at that today. And in terms of promise, what I'd say there is that's not the same as prescription. And again, this idea of just getting off that there's one direct route and you've got to stay in the precise way. Abraham was given a direction of travel. He was given a sense of a destination, but actually that wasn't a precise route map. That wasn't a prescribed journey. There was a lot of meandering in Abraham's route. He changed the pace of things. He changed direction. We see him at times ending up in Egypt and in other places. And in all of it, God kept showing up and being present and working. A promise gives a sense of direction, gives a purpose, but it's not going to always be that prescriptive, one step at a time. So let's hold promise lightly as a sense of direction, rather than a fearful taking one step and not daring to move on in a direction in case we get it wrong. God's grace-filled presence can turn up everywhere that our journey takes us. So holding that about calling and promise, and maybe there's one of those two things you just want to hold on to today, I'm going to flip quickly to the end of the journey, because we see that calling and that promise, and it was based in a destination of a promise being fulfilled. That's all held in the nature of God. The promise that's going to be filled was, yes, that idea of a nation that's bigger than all the people that you can count and that's going to be a blessing to everyone. That's the destination, the promise fulfillment. But Hebrews makes it even bigger. It talks about Abraham looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Abraham looking forward with eyes of faith to the bigness, the ruler, the authority of God coming in. That sense of a fulfillment in the future. We'll talk more about what he saw of that in action in a few moments. But what I want to offer to you now is in faith journeys, in our life's journey, our starting point is God's promise and his call. And I would say that's all based in the character of who God is. And it goes to God's destination, his fulfillment of his promises. So to see it simply as self-discovery and self-improvement loses the richness of life's journey. That's the beginning and the end of the journey, the setting out and the destination. But what about features of faith journeys? 4 things I've picked up that we can see in the passage, and I'm just going to mention them briefly. But maybe they're checks you can look at in your own life and say, within my journey, which is a journey of faith, where do these feature? Is one of them particularly resonating at the moment? So the process of the journey features dislocation. There is a leaving for Abraham, called from his land, his roots, his father's household to leave. That is the dislocation that we see mentioned in verse 5. Dislocation, separating. That's not saying that all that stuff before was bad, but it's saying that was for a season and now it's time to dislocate and separate and move elsewhere. I wonder for us in our lives that we've lived, where are those points of dislocation? The leaving behind a season. It might be about leaving behind a place, a habit, a relationship or something else. But maybe for our journey to continue, we need to recognise dislocation and separation. Secondly, a feature of the journey was worship. There we're told that Abraham came and he built an altar, an expression of worship. I was reflecting on that and thinking worship is significant for so many reasons. It reminds us of all that God is and who he is. It's an act, an expression that is countercultural. For Abraham, that was against what the Canaanites were doing. For us, our worship cannot be shaped by culture. It could be influenced by it, but it's not approving of culture. It is recognising who God is. Worship, giving God the glory, recognising who he is regularly. And there was a physicality, wasn't there, to the worship, the altar that Abraham built, a habit, a place that was tangible. I wonder, what are our tangibles, our regular habits, our features of worship in our life? And let's recognise they're not ones that society would approve of and think were great. They're countercultural. They give God the glory. They remind us of where we've come from and they point to our future. We need worship in our journeys of faith. For me, to be honest, features in dog walking and listening to some worship music. I wonder what it features for you. Also in the journey is uncertainty. I love that line in verse 8. He didn't know where he was going. It harks back to what I mentioned before about promise not being the same as prescription. There was a lot of uncertainty in Abraham's journey. There was times where he was saying, really? Really? Are you going to fulfill this promise? I still have no child. There's still no child. What's going on here? Uncertainty was part of the journey, and therefore there were twists and turns and waitings and striving in it that were part of it. It's not all clear-cut, it's not all prescriptive. There is uncertainty in journeys of faith. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong journey. It just means that's part of what a healthy faith journey does look like. Because in the uncertainty we are formed and we depend more on God. And then my favourite thing is there were glimpses in this faith journey. Glimpses of words of affirmation, glimpses of meeting with God, glimpses of what was going to be fulfilled. If we were to read on later on in Hebrews, there's this phrase I just find so moving, where people of faith is described as this: they didn't receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. I find that beautiful. That idea, I mean, look at Abraham. He never saw the multitudes. He saw one son as the step towards the fulfillment. Glimpses. I wonder with you, with me, where do we glimpse something of the future fulfillment of all God has promised? Those glimpses matter and they are part of our journey of faith. The glimpses give us a taste of the more. But for the moment, they are only glimpses. And we're in the company of Abraham and so many others when we do glimpse. I feel this is a gallop through Abraham's journey, but I'm just presenting some things that God has laid on my heart, and one or two might resonate with you. How do you see your journey? Do you see it intertwined, that faith is through it all and not separate? How do you see your journey in terms of calling and promise moving to fulfillment? Is it framed round who God is, what he's doing and what he promises? Place our journey in that. And what about the features of your journey? Is there something about dislocation that you just need to pray into at the moment? Something about worship that you find challenge and just need to interweave into life? Something about recognizing uncertainty is not the same as failure? Or is it something about glimpses, seeing those glimpses and valuing them? Journeys of faith. What is God saying to you today about your journey? Because journeys of faith are rich. They don't need to involve 1,000,000 miles travel. They may never go further than one small area in one small part of one country. But journeys with God are rich. Life in all its fullness. Lived between the promise and the fulfillment, with all that's in the middle, but done in the company of God.
So thank you to Sarah and the musical team for that. We're just going to come to some prayers of intercession. As the earth journeys around the sun, countless journeys are made around the globe. For all who travel the paths of life, we pray. Let there be food for the hungry. Lord, hear our prayer. Let there be shelter for the homeless. Lord, hear our prayer. Let there be rest for the weary. Lord, hear our prayer. Let there be healing for the sick. Lord, hear our prayer. Let there be comfort for the bereaved. Lord, hear our prayer. And as the earth journeys round the sun, we travel in faith towards you, Lord, for your kingdom is our journey's end. Amen. So, in terms of exit thoughts, some of the materials I was looking at, made it think of my own cricket ability, actually. Have you ever been embarrassed because you really enjoyed something, painting, singing, playing a sport, but you weren't very good at it? And in terms of your attitude and approach to it, would it make a difference if you thought of it as something you just simply loved doing? Because you're an amateur, right? We are amateurs at lots of things. And even as Sarah mentioned earlier, in terms of moving towards fulfillment, we only get a glimpse of it. We're amateurs at that as well. But when we talk about being an amateur and the word amateurish, or they've got quite derogatory connotations. Amateurs aren't winners. But they come from, as I've also found out doing this, from the Latin amator, meaning lover. So an amateur is someone who does something for the love of it, not for the money or the fame or success. And our faith, and these are some of the words I think Sarah sent me in some of her notes, that our faith can be messy and meandering. It's not going to be perfect. G.K. Chesterton said, if a thing is worth doing, then it's worth doing badly. And I guess that's, our journey of faith isn't always going to be perfect. And the things that we do aren't always going to be perfect. So my kind of takeaway, practical action for this in sending you out is try and notice the efforts that are being made by others, whether it's at home or work or school, and offer encouragement and praise to people in their messy and meandering ways. Even if you think you could do a better job than they can, try and be a person of encouragement and praise as people go on these kind of messy journeys, and see what impact your words have on those people. And that really brings our service to a close today. Thank you for joining us, and I'll leave you with this closing prayer. As we journey into the week ahead, let us walk by faith, filled with hope, holding fast to God's promises. Amen. Okay, well, thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next month.